Never set foot on that Terrebonne farm, Celeste. Swear it. Those words, spoken with a tremor I'd never heard in my husband Lynnell's voice during our 38 years together, were one of the few commands he ever gave me. I kept the promise, though his rare, wistful stories of a bayou childhood left behind gnawed at my midnight thoughts. But now Lynnell is gone, felled by a heart attack no doctor foretold, and the keys he bequeathed are tugging me toward the very soil he begged me to avoid. Dear friends, your comments mean the world to us. Like this video and write where you are watching us from. We will be happy to send you our regards. Rain was a constant in Baton Rouge, the kind that washed pollen from the oaks and left the sidewalks slick and shining. In late summer, it came in sheets, a humid curtain drawn across the Mississippi River, wrapping the city in gray. Celeste Brooks moved through this moisture like one of the river barges she watched from her porch, slow, purposeful, carrying stories unseen by those on land. For 30 years, she had kept routine, mornings cataloging rare books at Louisiana State University's library, afternoons spent volunteering at the art space downtown where teenagers painted their stories into life, and evenings with her husband Lynnell, discussing recipes and memories. The city itself pulsed with a mix of cultures. Cajun and Creole Catholic traditions merged with African American Baptist heritage to create a vibrant tapestry that spread from the Spanish town parades to the jazz clubs in the arts district. Celeste and Lynnell had built a life within this tapestry, weaving themselves into its many threads. What they shared was not dramatic in a cinematic sense. They had met at a community theater performance when Celeste recited a Langston Hughes poem with such quiet power that the engineer sitting in the third row felt compelled to speak to her after the final applause. Their courtship lasted years, filled with long walks along the levee and discussions about structural integrity versus poetic integrity. They never had riches. Yet they built wealth in shared glances, inside jokes, and the ritual of Sunday morning coffee brewed with chicory, a nod to the city's French roots. Lynnell would talk sometimes about his childhood in Terrebonne Parish, about the smell of bayou mud and the taste of pecan pie baked with cane syrup, but then his voice would tighten and he would fall silent. When Celeste asked about his family, he would simply say, "They do their things and I do mine," and move on to another subject. On a Tuesday in late September, the weather changed. The morning was clear, blue, the kind of crystalline day that Baton Rouge seldom saw because of its humid subtropical climate. Celeste woke early to prepare breakfast for Lynnell before he headed to the plant where he oversaw safety protocols. She sliced fruit and let the aroma of coffee fill the kitchen. But as she brought the plates to the table, she found him sitting with his head bent forward, his breath shallow. Panic fluttered under her ribs. She called his name. He looked up, eyes hazy, whispered, "My chest," and collapsed. There are some sounds that never leave you. The echo of a body hitting hard wood, the frantic beeping of the ambulance, the cold voice of a nurse who cannot say what you want to hear. At the hospital, they told her that his heart had simply stopped. There had been no warning, no previous sign. Sudden cardiac arrest, the doctor said, as if the term itself were a shield against pain. Celeste felt a fissure open inside her. Grief poured through it like the Mississippi over a broken levee. Everything that had felt solid, plans for retirement, discussions about visiting Ghana to trace ancestors, dissolved into the sterile light of the hospital room. In the days that followed, she moved like a ghost through the world she and Lynnell had built. Friends brought gumbo, fried catfish, and warm beignets, tangible attempts to comfort her. The city around her continued its rhythm. Students swarmed out of universities. The city was a college town where students made up around a fifth of the population, and the roar of traffic over the I-10 bridge never ceased. At night she sat on the porch, listening to the rain return, and felt both anchored by the river and adrift on its current. Weeks passed, and grief settled like silt. She returned to work at the library, her hands remembering motions that her mind fought to recall. One crisp afternoon, a man in a dark suit visited. He introduced himself as a notary working with one of Lynnell's old clients. He carried a folder of documents and a small brass key. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "your husband left instructions. There is property in Terrebonne Parish he purchased years ago, and you are the sole beneficiary." He placed a sealed letter in her hands. "He asked that you read this alone." Celeste stared at the paper as if it might bite. She knew of no property. They lived modestly, saving little. Their Baton Rouge bungalow was their biggest asset. Why would he buy land in a place he never spoke kindly of? She opened the envelope. Lynnell's handwriting looked shaky, as if written in haste. "My love, if you are reading this, then I have gone before you into whatever comes next. Forgive me for leaving you like this. I never wanted our story to end abruptly. You always deserved words. There is a farm near where I grew up, in Terrebonne, off the old parish road no one takes unless they are lost or in need of quiet. I bought it years ago. I've been working on it in secret because I needed to make something for you, a place that could hold you like I never could in my short life. There will be letters and videos explaining more. All I ask is that you go, touch that soil, let it speak to you. My ghosts are there, but so is my love. Forever, Elle." The letter shook in her hands. A farm? In Terrebonne? The parish had always existed in her mind as stories. Swamps, crawfish boils, low-lying land barely 5 feet above sea level. She thought about the man she had loved, the secrets he had carried. Rain tapped on the window, persistent. Celeste placed the letter on the table next to the brass key and felt a strange pull. She could remain in Baton Rouge, surrounded by the known, or she could follow her husband's last request and unearth whatever he had buried in the marshes of his youth. The days between receiving the letter and leaving for Terrebonne were thick with indecision. Celeste walked through rooms full of memories, touching their life together. The spice jar with his handwriting, the picture of them laughing at a second-line parade, the stack of postcards from students who had moved on and written to thank her for teaching them how to find their stories in the archives. Each object held a version of them that was now sealed in the past. She had spent her life in Baton Rouge, the capital city that sat on the eastern bank of the Mississippi River, a place defined by heat, water, and politics. The idea of trading that for swampland did not seem rational, yet a quiet voice inside, perhaps born from the same curiosity that had led her to study African diaspora histories, pushed her to go. Friends voiced concern and support. "Are you sure you want to go alone?" her neighbor Miss Pauline asked while handing her a casserole. "That land down there, it's not like here, it's mosquito swarms and gators." Celeste smiled politely but did not commit. She spent nights watching local news segments about the state's energy sector. Louisiana, she learned, had become a hub for natural gas, exporting it globally through vast networks of pipelines. The images of rigs and flare stacks felt distant from her grief, but something about them resonated with the weight of the folder the notary had given her. When she finally called the notary to ask for details, his voice softened. "Your husband was very deliberate, Mrs. Brooks. He paid cash. The deed is clear. All property taxes are paid up. The location is off a road called Bayou des Rouleaux. There's a caretaker who keeps an eye on things, but he hasn't been paid in a while. It's isolated. You might want to bring someone." Celeste thanked him and hung up. She didn't want company. She needed to meet this place alone to introduce herself to the land and whatever version of her husband lived there. She packed lightly. Photographs, a thick journal, comfortable shoes, and a box of tea. Before leaving, she visited Lynnell's grave, a simple headstone under a live oak in a small cemetery. "I'm going," she whispered, placing her fingers on his name. "If this was your last gift, I will see it, but I wish you were coming with me in a different way." The drive south took a little over an hour. Baton Rouge's sprawl gave way to sugar cane fields and stretches of cypress trees with moss-draped branches. She rolled the windows down, letting the heavy scent of bayou water fill the car. The road narrowed, hugging canals lined with egrets and alligators sunning themselves on muddy banks. Signs announced entry into Terrebonne Parish, whose very name meant good earth. The area was dotted with small fishing communities and oil service yards. Shrimp boats sat anchored next to platforms awaiting repairs. Everywhere she looked, water was present: ditches, bayous, lakes. The region consisted of about 41% water, making land feel precious, precarious. She finally turned onto Bayou de Rouleau Road, a gravel strip flanked by tall reeds. At the end of the road stood a wrought iron gate with a keypad. She punched in the code the notary had given her, and the gate opened with a groan. Beyond it lay a scene that forced her to stop the car and catch her breath. The farmhouse was not a ruin. It was a restored Acadian-style home raised on pilings to protect it from floodwaters. The paint was fresh, a soft cream offset by dark green shutters. On the front porch, rocking chairs sat ready and hanging baskets overflowed with ferns. The yard stretched out, a mosaic of thriving gardens and wild patches. There was an orchard with fig and persimmon trees, rows of collard greens and okra, and in the center a cluster of magnolia trees whose glossy leaves and white blooms scented the air. Lynnell had planted magnolias in Baton Rouge, but they had never flourished like this. Here they reached toward the sky, their roots firmly embedded in soil he had once called home. Celeste walked up the steps and unlocked the front door. The interior made her mouth fall open. The hallway was lined with African wax print textiles, their bright patterns a contrast to the white walls. A bookshelf held volumes on African American history and the Gulf Coast, along with a series of handmade quilts folded carefully. The kitchen, her kitchen now, had a large farmhouse sink, copper pots, and a gas stove she had once pointed out in a magazine, not thinking anyone was listening. There were notes taped to cabinets explaining where things were. Your favorite tea is in the left drawer. The spice rack has cayenne like you like. Every detail told her she had been seen, her tastes memorized, her comfort anticipated. On the dining table sat a laptop with a sticky note. Press play. She hesitated. Then she opened the computer and pressed the spacebar. Lynnell's face appeared on the screen, thinner than she remembered, eyes bright but rimmed with fatigue. "Hey, my love," he said. "If you're watching this, you're at the place I dreamed about. I'm so sorry I couldn't show it to you in person. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to burden you with my past until I had made peace with it. I want you to know that I spent my last months here, working with my hands, dreaming of your smile when you walk through those doors. Every day I recorded something for you. Stories, confessions, recipes. Think of this as my way of staying with you a little longer. Start with one video a day. Let me guide you." Celeste pressed her fingertips to the screen. His voice, recorded months ago, filled the quiet house. Grief crashed into her again, but alongside it, curiosity sprouted. Why had he rebuilt this farm for her? What had driven him to reconcile with the land of his birth in secret? And why the secrecy at all? She closed the laptop for the moment, overwhelmed. She spent the rest of the day exploring. The rooms were filled with items from their life and his past. A trunk held letters from his younger years and photographs of a teenage Lynnell standing next to 3 boys she assumed were his brothers. None of these men had been part of their life. The absence had always been a quiet ache she felt but never pressed upon. She found a map tucked in a drawer with the property boundaries outlined. Small X's marked spots around the fields. She didn't know what they indicated. As the sun began to dip, casting golden light over the magnolias, she sat on the porch and listened to the frogs begin their nightly chorus. The humidity felt like a blanket. On the horizon, the glow of distant flares from oil and gas facilities reminded her of the state's reliance on resources hidden below ground. She wondered if those X's on the map meant something more than garden plots. She wondered what else lay beneath her feet besides secrets. It took only 2 days for curiosity to outweigh grief. Celeste woke before dawn, made herself coffee, and returned to the laptop. She pressed play. Lynnell's face appeared again, slightly more gaunt. "Good morning," he said. "By now you've probably looked around. I hope the magnolias made you smile. I planted those because you love how their scent lingers on your skin. Today I want to tell you about this place. Growing up here, I hated it. It was flat and wet and smelled like fish guts. I thought leaving would free me from all that, but there's something about where you start that never leaves you. The soil gets under your nails and stays there." He laughed quietly. "You remember when we first met and I told you I was from here? You asked why I never visit. I said I didn't have a reason. The truth was, I carried too much anger. My brothers and I went through hell when Daddy died. They wanted to keep the farm. I wanted to go to school. They called me a traitor. We had one of those fights that splits things permanently. I left. Never looked back. For years, I tried to pretend Terrebonne didn't exist. But then I met you. You, who always said to honor where you came from. You made me think about roots and branches, not as things that trap you, but as anchors." Celeste paused the video and wiped her eyes. She had never known this story. Lynnell continued. "After that heart scare last year, I realized time wasn't promised. I drove down here to see what was left of Daddy's place. The house was falling apart. The fields were a mess. But I felt something when I stepped on the land. Anger, grief, yes, but also possibility. I decided to rebuild it, not for my brothers, not for me, but for you. I wanted to give you a sanctuary because you've given me one for 30 years. He described how he hired local carpenters and artisans, how he chose the fabric, the stove. Each decision was a love letter. He also spoke about his brothers. August, Jared, and Marcus. He said their names slowly, as if tasting bitterness. August is the oldest. He's always been about money. Jared follows him like a shadow. Marcus is the youngest and the smartest. They stayed here, did some things they shouldn't. They'll come around when they hear I'm gone. They'll want this place. I'm leaving you evidence of why they shouldn't have it. It's not just about the land. Something valuable is underneath. You'll find out. But know this, you have the legal right, and you have my blessing to fight for it. Use the lawyer's number in the desk, and don't trust them unless they show you they've changed." The video cut off. Celeste sat in the silent kitchen, heart pounding. The words, "something valuable underneath," echoed. She remembered the map with X's. She found it again and traced the marks. They formed a pattern along a line that matched the route of pipelines she had seen on television, the same pipelines that ran across Louisiana. part of a network of 24,000 miles. Could it be natural gas? She shook her head. Her husband was an engineer. He would have known how to check for that. If there were gas here, the state would know, wouldn't it? She folded the map and tucked it back. Later that day, she walked the fields, stepping carefully around puddles. The soil was rich and dark, the kind that farmers love. You could dig your fingers in and feel years of sediment. She reached a part of the property where the ground felt slightly higher. There was a metallic marker with numbers engraved. She bent down and wiped the mud. It looked like a surveyor's stake. Was this one of the X's? She took a picture with her phone. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, she heard tires on gravel. A truck approached slowly. 3 men stepped out. Even before they introduced themselves, Celeste knew who they were. The resemblance to the young men in the photograph was uncanny, though time had carved deeper lines into their faces. "Mrs. Brooks?" the tallest one asked. He was broad-shouldered, his hair graying at the temples. "I'm August. These are my brothers Jared and Marcus." Jared, thick-set with a soft jaw, nodded without smiling. Marcus, slim with sharp eyes, leaned against the truck, arms crossed. August removed his hat. "We heard Lynnell passed," he said, his brother's childhood nickname with surprising gentleness. "We're sorry for your loss. We wanted to talk about the farm." Celeste stiffened. "You mean the farm my husband left to me in his will?" "Well, that's the thing," Marcus interjected, his voice smooth. "We think he wasn't in his right mind when he made that will. He had been sick, off and on. We intend to contest it. This land has been in the family for generations, and we believe it should be shared." Jared added, "And there's, something else. A geologist from the state came by last year, said there's gas under here, big money, we could all benefit. Ain't that what Lynnell would have wanted? Family together." Celeste felt her stomach drop. So it was true. Natural gas. She remembered reading that all 64 parishes in Louisiana had produced oil or gas. It made sense that the brothers would want a piece. But Lynnell's instructions were clear. "My husband left this to me," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "We can discuss things like adults, but I won't be bullied." August's eyes flashed. "Ain't nobody bullying you, ma'am. We're just stating facts. We'll be in town for a few days if you change your mind." He tipped his hat again, an old-fashioned gesture that felt rehearsed, and they left. Celeste watched the truck disappear down the road. Fear, anger, and sadness churned together. She returned inside and pulled the desk drawers until she found the lawyer's card. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number. A calm voice answered on the second ring. "Duval Law Office?" "I think I need help," Celeste whispered, and realized this was the first time since Lynnell's death that her voice did not shake from grief alone, but from something else. Resolve. In the quiet that settled after the brothers drove off, Celeste called the number on the business card. The woman who answered introduced herself as Amaya Duval. Her voice was measured, the cadence of someone used to walking people through crises. When Celeste explained her situation, property, will, brothers contesting, talk of natural gas, Amaya listened without interrupting. Then she said, "I can be there by tomorrow. I'll bring copies of the relevant statutes. Do you have somewhere we can meet privately?" "There's a large kitchen table," Celeste replied, glancing toward the space where Lynnell's laptop still sat. A silent witness. "Good. I'll bring coffee." That night, Celeste could not sleep. She paced the house, trailing her fingers along bookshelves, counting the pictures on the walls. She imagined Lynnell building this sanctuary while hiding his illness. She imagined him lifting boards with calloused hands, his heart working overtime. Was there guilt woven into these walls? or only love? At midnight, she returned to the laptop. The next video loaded. Lynnell's voice was hoarse. "If you have met my brothers," he said, "then you probably know that charm and threats go hand in hand with them. When Mama died, they all found different ways to cope. August started hustling, buying and selling things that weren't his. Jared drank. Marcus charmed his way into deals. I left. You can't change them, but you can outsmart them. I left you a room. It's hidden behind the pantry shelf. Pull the second shelf from the bottom and it swings open. Inside you'll find files. Read them carefully. They're not for gossip. They're your shield." Celeste paused, mouth dry. Hidden room? Files? She went to the pantry, heart racing. The shelves were stocked with canned tomatoes, jars of homemade preserves, sacks of rice. She crouched and pulled on the second shelf. At first, nothing moved. Then she felt a click, and the entire unit pivoted inward, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. A cool draft rose from below. She hesitated. Then she descended, flipping a switch that lit a bare bulb. The room was small, concrete walled with a metal table and filing cabinets. On the table lay 3 thick folders labeled with the brothers' names. Celeste's stomach turned. She opened the first file, August. Inside were photocopies of documents, business licenses, tax returns, court summons. Some had red circles highlighting discrepancies. She skimmed a few pages. There was an eviction notice for a tenant who later sued August for unlawful removal. Another document showed a failed partnership in a company accused of falsifying environmental reports. There were transcripts of threatening voicemails he had left for someone who reported him. Her mouth tightened. Lynnell had collected evidence of wrongdoing. The second file, labeled Jared, held police reports for DUIs, unpaid child support, and several complaints filed by neighbors about noise and disturbances. The third file, Marcus, was the thickest. It contained contracts for land sales at inflated prices, lawsuits alleging fraud, and a list of offshore accounts. Celeste felt queasy, both at the intrusion into another's life and at the implications. If the brothers contested the will, these documents could be used to question their credibility. But was she prepared to wage war with family? She recalled Lynnell's face in the video, the plea in his eyes. Use them only if you must. She closed the cabinet, took a deep breath, and climbed back up. The hidden door swung shut, leaving the pantry looking ordinary. She returned to the kitchen just as dawn stained the sky pink. Amaya arrived at 9 sharp, carrying a tote bag full of files and a thermos of chicory coffee. She was in her late 30s with locks pulled into a bun and eyes that missed nothing. After introductions, she spread documents across the table. In Louisiana, forced heirship laws don't apply to spouses, she explained. If there's a valid will leaving the property to you, you have legal ground. The brothers can contest based on mental incompetence, undue influence, or fraud. We need to show that Lynnell was of sound mind when he executed the will. She held up the video recordings. These are gold. They show him articulating his intentions clearly. He set up the deed, paid taxes, recorded his wishes. That's strong evidence. Celeste nodded but mentioned the other issue. They say there's gas under the farm. Amaya's eyebrows lifted. I won't pretend to be a geologist, but I know the state's full of gas deposits. Companies pay for mineral rights. If there's a deposit here, it could be valuable. That may motivate them, but it doesn't change the will. Mineral rights follow ownership unless severed. We'll need to check titles. I also need to know if there's anything that could be used against them. Celeste hesitated, then led her to the pantry and showed her the hidden files. Amaya leafed through them, whistling softly. He did his homework. This stuff, if filed properly, it could lead to investigations, but you should be careful. They may retaliate. We'll keep it as leverage. For the next hours, they strategized. Amaya drafted motions to submit to court if needed and contacted the notary to verify dates and signatures. Celeste wrote a detailed account of every conversation with the brothers. They agreed to wait and see if the brothers filed formal proceedings before making the evidence public. When Amaya left, Celeste felt both relieved and burdened. She had entered a world of legal maneuvers and potential scandals. She thought about the library, the quiet aisles of books. This was nothing like that. This was messy and human, full of secrets and motives. The following days were a study in contrasts. Each morning, Celeste watched a new video from Lynnell, hearing his voice describe memories and recipes, hearing him confess small regrets, how he wished he had danced more, how he loved the way she tucked her foot under his leg on the couch. These moments provided warmth amid the tension. He encouraged her to explore the land, to plant what she loved. He told stories about Mama, about how she would make him and his brothers gather oysters in the marsh and how they'd sneak spoonfuls of sugar cane from the mill. Each story painted the brothers in various lights, sometimes mischievous, sometimes cruel, sometimes vulnerable. There was a memory of Marcus saving a stray dog from drowning, another of August teaching Lynnell to drive their daddy's truck. These recollections complicated the picture drawn by the files. They were not caricatures. They were humans who had made choices. During the afternoons, Celeste walked the property with a notebook, marking the X's on the map and comparing them with markers in the ground. She contacted a geologist recommended by a neighbor to confirm whether there really was gas beneath. The geologist, a woman named Tessa, with mud on her boots and a laugh like thunder, sampled soil and explained how salt domes and ancient formations created pockets of natural gas throughout South Louisiana. "This area's ripe for extraction," she said. "If there's a deposit, you'll hear from companies soon. Do you own the mineral rights?" "I think so," Celeste answered. "My husband never mentioned selling them." "Well, get ready," Tessa chuckled. "Gas companies will come knocking. Don't sign anything without counsel." Celeste thanked her and felt the weight of another decision looming. She loved the quiet mornings, the way dew collected on the magnolia leaves, the way the frogs sang at night. She worried about rigs and pipelines disturbing that, but she also knew that resources like gas were vital to the state's economy, bringing jobs and revenue. The 24,000 miles of pipeline in Louisiana were arteries connecting communities. Could there be a way to balance preservation and profit? Or would she have to choose? The question hung over her like humidity. One evening, as she sat on the porch sipping tea, a car rolled into the driveway. It wasn't the brothers' truck. Gabrielle, her daughter, stepped out. Her hair was braided down her back, her expression closed. "Mama," she said, her voice tight, "we need to talk." Celeste's heart leapt and then settled into a nervous flutter. Gabrielle lived in Lafayette, 2 hours west, where she worked as an archivist at a cultural center. Mother and daughter spoke every week, but grief had clouded their conversations lately. Gabrielle had not come to Terrebonne yet. Celeste stood and opened her arms. "Baby, I'm so glad you're here." Gabrielle returned the embrace stiffly, pulling back quickly. She glanced around, taking in the house and land. "It's beautiful," she admitted, but there was something guarded in her tone. "But we need to talk about Uncle August and them. They reached out to me." Celeste's stomach tightened. She gestured for Gabrielle to sit. They settled on the porch swing. The evening air buzzed with cicadas. "What did they say?" Celeste asked. "That you were keeping me in the dark," Gabrielle replied. "That Daddy was sick and making irrational decisions? That he left everything to you because you influenced him? They said there's a lot of money at stake and that Daddy would have wanted me to have something too." Her eyes searched her mother's face, looking for betrayal. "I would never keep you in the dark," Celeste said, willing her voice to remain calm. "Your father made these decisions before he died. He told me nothing until the will. He left videos explaining everything. He wanted you to watch them. Did the uncles show you anything? Evidence?" Gabrielle shook her head. "They didn't need evidence. I believed them because, I don't know. I guess part of me always wondered why Daddy didn't talk about his family. They said you were going to cut me out, that you'd keep it all." Her voice broke slightly at the last sentence. Celeste felt a flash of anger, at the brothers for manipulating her daughter, at herself for not anticipating this. "Look at me," she said softly. Gabrielle met her gaze. "Everything your father did, he did out of love. He loved you so much. He may not have known how to show it sometimes, but he did. There are videos for you. He talks about regrets, about missing your high school play because of a work emergency, about how proud he was when you defended your thesis. He left this land to me because he wanted me to have a place to heal. But you are not cut out. You are part of this." Gabrielle's eyes glistened. "Then why didn't he tell me about his past? Why didn't he let me meet his family when I was little? I have a right to know my heritage." "You do," Celeste agreed. "I don't have all the answers. I'm learning too. Lynnell carried pain and pride. He thought he was protecting us by keeping distance. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe I was wrong to never push. But baby, the uncles are not doing this out of love. They want the money beneath our feet." Celeste pointed to the ground. "There is natural gas here. They see dollar signs. They don't see you. If they did, they wouldn't use you." Gabrielle looked away, wiping a tear. "They said they could help me pay off my student loans. They called me Gabby like Daddy never did. They told stories about when he was young and reckless. It made him more human. I was drawn to that." Celeste reached for her daughter's hand. "I won't demonize them. They are your blood. They were Lynnell's brothers, and they have parts of him I'll never know. But they also have choices to make. I want you to meet them, maybe when things calm down, but I need you to know where I stand. I will honor your father's wishes. I will fight for this place because he asked me to, and I will share it with you because you are my daughter. Watch his videos, hear his voice, let him tell you himself." Gabrielle nodded slowly. "Will you show me?" They went inside. Celeste opened the laptop and selected a video labeled "For G." Lynnell's face filled the screen. He smiled softly. "Hey, baby girl," he said. "Or maybe I shouldn't call you that. You're a grown woman now with your own home and job and life, but to me, you'll always be the one who puts stickers all over my toolbox. I'm sorry I didn't talk about Terrebonne. It wasn't because I wanted to deny you your roots. It was because I hadn't dealt with my own. I thought by leaving, I was protecting myself from pain. But I see now that I denied you stories. That's my regret. You deserve better." He paused, eyes wet. "I want you to have whatever you need from this farm. But more than that, I want you to know that you are loved. Your mama is the strongest person I know. Listen to her. Help her. Don't let bitterness steal what we built." By the end of the video, Gabrielle was sobbing quietly. She leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I was angry and I let them get to me." "It's okay," Celeste soothed, stroking her daughter's hair. We're all grieving differently. Let's face this together. Gabrielle stayed for a few days. During that time, she explored the farm, tasted the figs, and helped Celeste weed the garden. They laughed when they discovered that Lynnell had labeled the lemon tree for G's lemonade stand, even though Gabrielle hadn't had a lemonade stand since she was 10. In quiet moments, they watched more videos. Lynnell recounted tales of his mother cooking gumbo, of nights under mosquito nets, of his father's laugh. These stories filled gaps in Gabrielle's understanding, connecting her to a lineage she had been denied. But tension lingered. The brothers continued to call, leaving messages that grew more insistent. They visited again, this time bringing a lawyer of their own. Celeste refused to let them inside. They argued on the porch, voices low but heated. "We ain't trying to hurt you," Jared said, shifting his weight. "We just want what's right." "What's right is honoring Lynnell's will," Celeste replied. "You want to talk? Let's do it in front of a judge." "You think that judge is going to side with you over blood?" Marcus sneered. "We were here when he was born. We were here when Daddy died. Who are you?" "I was the one he chose," Celeste said quietly. The words cut all of them. The brothers left muttering. As predicted, a lawsuit arrived via certified mail. The brothers were contesting the will on grounds of mental incapacity and undue influence. They claimed Lynnell's illness had impaired his judgment and that Celeste had coerced him into leaving her everything. The language in the petition stung. It painted her as a manipulative wife who isolated her husband from his family. The irony was bitter. She had long encouraged Lynnell to reconcile, but he had refused. Amaya filed a response, attaching copies of the videos as exhibits. She also included medical records showing that Lynnell had undergone regular checkups and had been declared competent by his doctor. The notary submitted a sworn statement affirming that Lynnell had appeared lucid when signing the will. The case was set for a hearing in Houma, the parish seat, in 6 weeks. During those weeks, Celeste prepared. She continued to tend the farm, pulling weeds and harvesting vegetables, their earthiness grounding her. She watched Lynnell's videos for strength. Some days his words made her laugh. Other days they made her break down, the ache of missing him fresh. She also met more people from the community. Ms. Rosa from down the road brought over sweet potatoes and told her about the local women's quilting circle. A young man named Darryl stopped by to ask if he could fish in her pond. She agreed, and he returned with fresh speckled trout and stories about his grandmother, who had worked on the farm decades ago. These interactions made her feel less alone. The land was not just property, it was part of a network of lives. One afternoon, she invited Tessa, the geologist, to join her and Amaya for a discussion about mineral rights. Tessa brought maps showing subterranean formations. "You're sitting on part of a salt dome," she explained. "These domes create traps where oil and gas accumulate. That's why there's a marker with numbers. It's likely a survey for potential extraction. If you own the mineral rights, you can lease them. Companies will pay you a percentage of what they extract. But there are also environmental considerations. Wells can disrupt ecosystems. You'll want clauses in any contract about cleanup and safety." Celeste listened, absorbing this new vocabulary. The thought of drilling rigs on the property unsettled her, but she also imagined using the income to improve the farm, to build something lasting for the community. "If I decide to lease, can I direct funds to projects here?" she asked. "Absolutely," Amaya replied. "We can set up a trust. But let's cross that bridge after the trial." Meanwhile, word of the pending case spread. Some neighbors voiced support, while others whispered that Celeste was selfish. In small towns, stories travel faster than floodwater. Gabrielle overheard someone at the grocery store say, "That city lady trying to take our boy's land." She wanted to scream that she was that boy's daughter, but she held her tongue. The experience taught her that perception and truth rarely align. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. The courthouse in Houma was a white building with columns, its halls buzzing with lawyers and clients. Celeste sat at the counsel table with Amaya, her hands gripping a handkerchief. The brothers sat across from her, their lawyer whispering in their ears. A portrait of a stern judge from the 1950s hung above the bench. The current judge, a middle-aged woman named Judge Broussard, entered and called the case. The brothers' lawyer argued first. He painted a picture of 3 sons abandoned by their brother, cut out of his will by a wife who isolated him. He questioned Lynnell's mental state, citing his hidden illness and the secrecy surrounding the farm. "Is it reasonable," he said, "to think a man would purchase and renovate a property in secret while his health declined without undue influence?" He insinuated that Celeste had pushed him to sever ties. He also brought up the gas, suggesting she had been motivated by greed. Amaya rose. Her voice was steady. She played clips from Lynnell's videos in open court. The room watched as he spoke clearly about his reasons, his love for his wife, his awareness of his brother's likely reactions. She presented medical records, the notary's testimony, and evidence of Lynnell's bank transactions showing he paid contractors independently. She also asked permission to submit the files from the hidden room under seal. Judge Broussard examined the folders in chambers. When she returned, her expression was unreadable. Each brother took the stand. August, with eyes narrowed, insisted Lynnell had been confused in recent years, forgetting dates and misplacing tools. Amaya asked, "Do you have medical training?" He admitted he did not. Jared cried, saying he just wanted to be part of his brother's life. Amaya gently asked why he had never reached out in 30 years. He stumbled. Marcus, ever composed, claimed he was concerned about the environmental impact of drilling and wanted to ensure proper oversight. Amaya responded by submitting evidence of his fraudulent land deals. His face flushed. Then Gabrielle testified. She took a deep breath and told the court how her father had been absent at times but always present in his love. She admitted she had doubted her mother, but that watching the videos had changed her perspective. "My father wasn't manipulated," she said, her voice clear. "He made a choice to give my mother this place, and I support that. I also want to know my uncles, but this isn't the way." Tears slid down her cheeks. Celeste reached out to squeeze her hand. In closing, Amaya addressed the judge directly. "Families are complicated, Your Honor. There is pain on both sides, but the law is clear. The decedent left a will. He explained his intentions. He was competent. Contesting a will because one doesn't like the outcome is not justice. It is resentment, masquerading as righteousness." Judge Broussard took a recess and returned after an hour. She summarized the evidence. Mr. Brooks executed a will in 2024. He was of sound mind. He expressed his intentions verbally and in writing. The contest fails to provide sufficient proof of incapacity or undue influence. She paused, glancing at the brothers. "Regarding the allegations of fraud and misconduct presented against the petitioners, I will forward that information to the district attorney for review." Gasps ripple. "Therefore, I uphold the will. The property remains with Mrs. Celeste Brooks. Mineral rights follow. Court adjourned." The gavel fell. Sound seemed to rush back into the courtroom. The brothers looked stunned. August muttered under his breath. Jared shook his head. Marcus glared at Celeste but said nothing. They left quickly, their lawyer trailing behind. Celeste sat, hands trembling, tears streaming down her face. Relief washed over her, mixed with sadness. The fight had been necessary, but no one truly won. She thought of Lynnell, of his recorded face smiling, and whispered, "We did it." The court's decision did not bring immediate peace. Rather, it opened space for new beginnings and new challenges. Celeste returned to the farm with Gabrielle, feeling both victorious and uneasy. The brothers had lost the legal battle, but they were still part of the story. Rumors circulated that they might appeal or even vandalize the property. Celeste strengthened the locks and installed motion lights, not wanting to turn the farm into a fortress, but recognizing the need for caution. Days bled into a routine that balanced healing and labor. Each morning, Celeste and Gabrielle walked the garden together, hands dirt-stained and hearts slowly mending. They planted herbs and flowers, adding rosemary and lavender to the magnolia grove. They started a compost pile, laughing when a black snake slithered out from under a log. In the afternoons, Celeste met with neighbors. Inviting women from the quilting circle and the church choir to visit, they sat on the porch, drinking sweet tea, sharing stories. The farm became a place of exchange and listening. Women spoke of losses. The husband lost to cancer, the son to incarceration. They spoke of resilience. The daughter graduating with honors, the neighbor surviving a hurricane. Celeste realized how much she had missed being part of a community that shared not just food, but histories. One afternoon, as she weeded the okra patch, Marcus walked up the driveway alone. Celeste's first instinct was to call for Gabrielle, but she stood her ground. Marcus approached slowly, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I ain't here to fight," he said. "Can we talk?" Celeste nodded, wary. They sat under the magnolia tree, its blossoms dropping petals like confetti. Marcus sighed. "We didn't expect you to win. August is fuming. Jared's drinking more. I'm tired." He looked away, his jaw tight. "You know, when Daddy died, Linny left. We hated him for it. Mama worked herself sick to keep this place afloat. August kept saying, 'If Linny were here.' We built up this resentment. When we heard he had bought the land back and fixed it up for you, it felt like he was spitting on us. But sitting in that courtroom, hearing him talk on those videos, he wasn't the villain we made him." Celeste felt her throat constrict. "He wasn't perfect," she said. "He should have reached out. But none of you did either." "I know," Marcus admitted. "And those files? Yeah, I did some things I ain't proud of. I'm not here to apologize for August, but I wanted to say, if you ever decide to lease the gas, we'd like to be part of those talks. Not because of money only, but because we don't want strangers coming and tearing up the land either. We grew up here. We care too, even if it don't look like it." Celeste considered his words. Could cooperation be possible? Trust would be difficult, but maybe there was a path. "I'm not saying yes or no right now," she said, "but I'll think about it. On one condition, this place is also for the community, especially the women. If any deal harms that, it's off." Marcus nodded. "Fair." He stood, hesitating. "I also wanted to give you this." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was a photograph of 4 young boys standing in front of a cypress tree, arms around each other. One of them was Lynnell, eyes bright. The other 3 were his brothers. A woman stood behind them, her hand on Lynnell's shoulder. "That's Mama," Marcus said. "Her name was Ruby. Linny loved her. I figured you should know what she looked like." Tears prickled Celeste's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. After Marcus left, Celeste sat for a long time staring at the photograph. She thought about the woman named Ruby, about the life she had given her sons, and the ways grief and pride had twisted their relationships. She thought about how many stories were buried with her, how many recipes, jokes, and lessons. Celeste's desire to honor those stories intensified. She decided that the farm would not only be a place of beauty, but also a place of memory. With Gabrielle's help, she began planning. They converted one of the outbuildings into a studio space, painting the walls and filling it with tables, easels, and shelves. They hung quilts and photographs on the walls. Celeste reached out to Ms. Rosa and the women from the quilting circle, inviting them to meet weekly to sew and share. She contacted the director of the Cultural Center in Lafayette, where Gabrielle worked, to discuss joint workshops on family histories. Gabrielle compiled oral history guides and brought audio recorders. They posted flyers at the general store and the church. Women's Heritage Collective, gathering to stitch stories, share recipes, paint memories, all welcome. The first meeting saw 5 women arrive. Ms. Rosa brought her granddaughter, a shy teenager named Layla who loved drawing. An older woman named Ms. Billy brought a shoe box of photographs of her ancestors. Another woman, Tanisha, brought her 3-year-old who scribbled on scrap paper. They sat in a circle, awkward at first. Celeste broke the ice by telling the story of the Magnolia Grove, how Lynnell had planted each tree with a wish. Soon stories flowed. Ms. Billy talked about her grandmother, who had been a midwife in the days when hospitals refused black women. Tanisha shared a recipe for pralines passed down from her aunt. Layla shyly showed a sketch of a bayou at sunset, the cypress knees jutting from the water. Tears and laughter mingled. At the end, Ms. Rosa said, "We need this. We need to remember. Thank you for opening your home." The gatherings grew. Women brought dishes and children, songs and sorrows. They quilted and painted and cooked. They practiced Yoruba drumming one afternoon, their rhythms echoing across the fields. The farm became known as Ruby's Place, named after Lynnell's mother, a nod to the woman whose photograph now hung in the studio. The name was a way of healing, of acknowledging that the brother's mother had been erased from Celeste's life and restoring her into the story. As community activities flourished, the question of the natural gas deposit resurfaced. Letters from energy companies arrived, each promising lucrative deals. Celeste and Gabrielle sat with Amaya and Tessa, poring over proposals. One company offered a high royalty percentage but minimal environmental safeguards. Another offered lower royalties but guaranteed they would use horizontal drilling to minimize surface disruption. A third proposed partnering with local workforce programs. Celeste felt the weight of the decision. Accepting could provide funds to expand Ruby's Place, offer scholarships, repair the levee at the back of the property. But drilling could disrupt the tranquility she and the community were cultivating. She thought about the network of pipelines across the state, about the jobs they created, and the spills that sometimes occurred. She thought about the magnolias, the frogs, the smell of fresh earth. She also thought about the economic realities of Terrebonne Parish, where employment was often tied to extractive industries. Many of the women at Ruby's Place had husbands or sons who worked on rigs. To reject the resource could be seen as dismissing their livelihoods. She organized a community meeting at the farm, inviting not just the women but anyone interested. The brothers came too, each taking a seat at the back. Tessa presented the geological data in plain language. Amaya explained mineral rights and leasing terms. A social worker spoke about the environmental impact of drilling and restoration projects. Celeste then opened the floor. Voices differed, Darrell, the young fisherman, worried that drilling would contaminate the waterways. Ms. Rosa pointed out that economic opportunities were scarce and asked what would fund community projects if not the gas. Marcus surprised some by standing and saying, "We can't stop the world from moving forward, but we can decide how it moves here. If drilling happens, we need to demand respect for the land and contracts that benefit us all." After hours of discussion, the group reached a consensus. They would negotiate with the company offering responsible drilling practices and community investment. The contract would include funds specifically earmarked for Ruby's Place, stipulations for job training for local residents, and clauses requiring immediate cleanup of any spills. Marcus and Jared signed on as part of an oversight committee symbolizing a tentative new alliance. August did not attend the meeting. He had left the parish, word had it, to work on a rig in Texas. Negotiations were lengthy, but eventually resulted in a contract that satisfied most. Drilling rigs appeared on the far edge of the property, their metal skeletons rising against the horizon. They were both a reminder of the world's insatiable hunger and a testament to the community's ability to shape its own destiny. The noise and activity were jarring at first, but operations stayed away from the Magnolia Grove and the studio. Funds flowed into Ruby's Place, allowing for the installation of a commercial kitchen where Tanisha led cooking classes on Creole cuisine. They bought sewing machines and paints. They invited historians to teach about the history of Terrebonne Parish, the indigenous Huma people, the Acadian exiles, the enslaved Africans whose descendants now quilted at those tables. Celeste ensured that the classes honored the land's complexity. As months passed, a sense of balance emerged. The farm thrived as both a cultural center and a source of income. Celeste and Gabrielle continued to watch Lynnell's videos, now less out of grief and more as a way to keep him part of the conversation. His recipes were tested in the new kitchen. His stories were integrated into workshops. He became a presence not of absence, but of guidance. Relationships with the brothers evolved. Marcus attended gatherings occasionally, listening more than speaking. He helped build raised beds for vegetables. Jared showed up one day with a crate of crabs he had caught, shyly asking if he could join a cooking class. He and Gabrielle ended up laughing together as they cracked shells. August remained distant, but he sent a postcard with a picture of a drilling rig in West Texas scribbled with, "Hope y'all doing well. A." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. One autumn afternoon, Celeste sat under the magnolia tree with Gabrielle. They watched children run between the trunks playing a game of tag. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Gabrielle asked quietly. Celeste smiled. "Sometimes. The city calls with its theater and museums," she admitted. She missed Baton Rouge's art scene, the galleries and performances. "But then I see what's happening here, how this place is becoming something bigger than me, and I feel rooted." She paused. "Roots can hold you, but they can also feed you. I've learned the difference." Gabrielle nodded. "I used to think roots were just obligations. Now I think they're connections. They can be heavy, but they also keep you from floating away." Winter came softly to South Louisiana. Temperatures dipped just enough for jackets in the mornings, and the air grew crisp. Ruby's Place continued to buzz with activity. They hosted a holiday market where women sold quilts, paintings, and jars of pickled okra. The money raised went into a fund to repair the community center's roof and to support a local midwife program. Celeste marveled at how quickly the idea had blossomed. What had begun as a secret gift from her husband had become a lifeline for many. Yet life's currents rarely stay steady. One evening, a letter arrived from a Houston law firm representing an energy conglomerate. It stated that, according to records, a portion of the mineral rights under Celeste's property had been sold by Ruby decades ago to cover medical bills. The company now claimed ownership over that portion and planned to drill additional wells. Panic fluttered in Celeste's chest. She took the letter to Amaya. They pored over old deeds, searching for proof. It turned out to be true. A small tract had been sold in 1978. The sale had been legal. The company had a right to extract. The news threatened to unravel the fragile sense of control Celeste had gained. They called another community meeting. People were frustrated. "We did everything right," Tanisha said. "Why do they still get to come in?" Amaya explained that this company was different from the one they had contracted with. The earlier agreements did not apply. "We can negotiate, but our leverage is limited," she said. Tessa added that the company planned to drill horizontally, which might affect the water table. The term water table reminded Celeste of all the secrets lying beneath. Not just gas and oil, but memories, choices, and now contracts made by necessity years ago. She thought of Ruby selling rights to pay hospital bills, of the difficult decisions women make to survive. She felt a surge of empathy toward the brother's mother, a woman she had never met, but whose actions still ripple through the family. The community decided to fight, even if the odds were against them. They organized protests, wrote op-eds, and reached out to environmental groups. Gabrielle and Layla created a mural depicting the history of the land, with layers showing indigenous peoples, enslaved Africans, oil rigs, and quilts. They painted it on the side of the barn as a visual protest and testament. Media outlets picked up the story. Small community fights, big oil over ancestral land. Donations poured in. Lawyers volunteered time. The company, facing public pressure, agreed to meet. Representatives flew in wearing suits and carrying laptops. The meeting was tense. Celeste spoke first, her voice steady. "We are not opposed to development. We understand the importance of energy. Many of our loved ones work in that industry, but this land is more than a resource. It's a home. It's Ruby's place. We ask that you drill responsibly away from our wells and gardens. We ask for monitoring of water quality and soil. We ask that a portion of proceeds be reinvested into this parish." To her surprise, the lead representative, an older woman from New Orleans, nodded. "I remember Terrebonne," she said softly. "My grandmother lived in Dulac. I know what it means to have land taken. Let me see what we can do." Weeks later, a compromise was reached. The company would shift its drilling to a less intrusive angle, create a fund for environmental monitoring, and donate to Ruby's place. It wasn't perfect, but it was a victory. By spring, the first magnolia blooms appeared again. Celeste stood beneath them, breathing in their lemony scent. The petals reminded her of pages in a book, delicate, filled with stories. She thought about the narrative that had unfolded since Lynnell's death. The grief, the secrets, the battles, the unexpected alliances. She thought of the women who now filled the farm with laughter and tears, of the men who fished in her pond, of the children who traced their ancestors on paper. She thought of Ruby, whose name now graced the space, of Lynnell, whose voice still guided her through his videos, of Gabrielle, who had grown from daughter to partner. One evening, as the sun set over the bayou, casting the water and the rigs in equal golden light, Celeste wrote in her journal, "In the beginning, grief was a flood, threatening to drown me. Now, water still surrounds me, but it also nourishes. We live between the river and the bayou, between the past and the future, between extraction and cultivation. Perhaps that is the lesson. We are always balancing tides. The farm is no longer a secret. It is a beacon. It holds pain and joy, scars and healing. And like the magnolias, we will bloom year after year, even when storms come. She closed the journal and looked out at the lights of the rigs flickering in the distance, then turned back toward the house where women's voices floated out, telling stories that would carry forward long after the wells ran dry. Summer returned with its oppressive heat and afternoon thunderstorms. The magnolia blossoms had given way to glossy green leaves. The figs on the trees swelled. The farm thrummed with activity. Ruby's Place hosted a storytelling festival for the first time, drawing women from across the parish and beyond. They came to exchange narratives, spoken, sung, danced. Celeste, now comfortable as a host and facilitator, greeted each arrival with a hug or a handshake. She felt like a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of voices. The festival began with a procession down the gravel drive. Drummers from the local high school led, followed by quilters carrying a long banner they had stitched together, depicting scenes from the community's past, a wagon loaded with sugar cane, a church raising its steeple after a hurricane, a line of people standing in front of a voting booth. The banner was a timeline, each panel sewn by a different woman, using fabrics passed down through generations. Once everyone was seated under a large tent, Celeste took the makeshift stage. "Welcome to Ruby's Place and to our first story harvest," she said. "We are here to gather what has been planted, to share what has grown, and to sow seeds for those who will come after us." The crowd clapped. Celeste introduced the first storyteller, an elderly woman named Miss Edna, who had lived through segregation and integration, hurricanes and oil booms. Miss Edna stood, her back straight despite her years, and began, "My story starts on a boat." She spoke of being born on a houseboat in the marsh, of learning to swim before she could walk. She recalled how, when she was 12, her father was forced to sell land to an oil company for a fraction of its worth. She described watching rigs rise where oak trees had stood. Her voice did not tremble when she talked about her brothers leaving for Houston to work on pipelines, sending money home that paid for her to finish school. "We lost land, yes," she said, looking around, "but we didn't lose ourselves. We're still here, still cooking gumbo, still singing. That's why I tell this, so y'all know we can bend without breaking." Story after story followed. A young woman named Lynnell performed a spoken word piece about climate change and its impact on the bayou. An elder from the Huma Nation sang in her native language, her voice rising and falling like waves. Tanisha led a call and response about recipes, with the audience chiming in ingredients for jambalaya, gumbo, and boudin. Gabrielle presented a slideshow of archival photographs she had digitized, juxtaposing images of sharecroppers with modern farmers, black and white snapshots of weddings with color shots of Ruby's Place workshops. In the evenings, after the formal program ended, smaller circles formed. Women sat around fire pits, roasting marshmallows, telling stories they might not have told on stage. One woman spoke of domestic abuse and how she found strength to leave through the support of her church. Another confessed her fear that her children would move away and never return. Celeste noticed a pattern. Beneath each story of pain was a thread of resilience. No matter the era, French colonization, American annexation, the civil rights movement, the era of natural gas booms, people adapted and resisted. She thought about how history is not just dates and events, but the accumulation of countless small acts of courage. During a break on the second day, Marcus approached the tent with a woman Celeste did not recognize. She had salt and pepper hair, high cheekbones, and eyes that flashed with intelligence. Marcus introduced her as Lorraine, a cousin who had lived in New Orleans for years. "Lorraine's a historian," he said. "She heard about this and wanted to come." Lorraine smiled. "I've been researching the role of free women of color in Louisiana in the 19th century," she said. "Did you know many of them owned property in Terrebonne? They farmed, ran businesses, and bought their freedom and their relatives. But their stories rarely get told." She asked if she could share some findings. Celeste eagerly offered her a slot. Lorraine spoke the next morning, weaving tales of women who defied societal expectations, whose names had been forgotten by official histories but preserved in family records and land deeds. She showed documents of a woman named Celestine who owned land near Bayou de Rouleau in 1842. Everyone murmured at the coincidence of the name. Lorraine's presentation inspired Celeste to dig deeper into the archives. Gabrielle and Lorraine offered to help. After the festival, they drove to the parish courthouse, where centuries of records lay in ledgers and boxes. They flipped through deeds written in French and English, records of births and deaths, manumission papers. They searched for the name Ruby and discovered that Ruby had filed a suit in the 1950s against an oil company for damaging her rice field. The case was dismissed, but the document included a testimony by Ruby herself. In it, she described the sound of drilling disrupting her chickens, the smell of diesel choking her children. Reading her words, Celeste felt Ruby's presence. She imagined Ruby standing in that courthouse, not intimidated by white men in suits, determined to speak for herself. "She was fighting then what we're fighting now," Gabrielle whispered. Back at the farm, Celeste shared their findings with the women. They decided to add a history wall to Ruby's place, a timeline that would honor not just famous names but local heroes, midwives, farmers, teachers, activists. Marcus volunteered to build the display. Jared, surprising everyone, offered to use his connections to procure old photographs from neighbors. The act of constructing the wall became symbolic. People who had once been divided were now hammering nails side by side, literally building a shared history. As the year progressed, the relationships between Celeste and Lynnell's brothers continued to evolve. Marcus attended Ruby's place regularly, contributing his carpentry skills and listening more than he spoke. Jared, who had struggled with alcohol, joined a support group at the church and started to volunteer at community events. He found solace in gardening, spending hours weeding and watering, his hands steady for the first time in years. August remained distant, but he called occasionally. His voice laced with regret. He talked about long nights on the rig, about the loneliness of being away from home, about the money not filling the emptiness. Celeste listened, offering no judgment. One evening, Marcus approached Celeste with a heavy expression. "There's something you should know," he said. He confessed that, shortly after Lynnell died, August had considered vandalizing the farm to make it uninhabitable. Marcus had talked him out of it, arguing that disrespecting their brother's memory would only deepen the rift. "I don't say this to scare you," Marcus explained, "but to be honest. We were hurt and angry. We thought you were the enemy. Now I see we were wrong. I'm sorry for everything." Celeste absorbed the information. The idea that her sanctuary had almost been destroyed made her shiver, but she appreciated the honesty. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "We can't change the past, but we can decide what comes next." She extended her hand. Marcus took it. It was a small gesture, but it signaled a shift from adversaries to cautious allies. Meanwhile, Gabrielle and Lorraine continued their archival research, uncovering more stories of women who had shaped Terrebonne's history. They found records of a community of formerly enslaved people who, after the Civil War, pooled their resources to buy land and build a school. They found diaries of Acadian women describing hurricanes and droughts. They discovered a ledger from a free woman of color who lent money to white neighbors, flipping the common narrative of dependence. Each finding added layers to the narrative they were constructing. They decided to compile the research into a book, Women of Terrebonne, Stories of Soil and Salt, to be published by the Cultural Center in Lafayette. Proceeds would support Ruby's Place. As fall approached, a storm brewed in the Gulf. Hurricanes were a fact of life in Louisiana, as common as mosquitoes and magnolias. The community prepared, boarding windows, stocking supplies, securing loose objects. Celeste and Gabrielle packed away quilts and paintings, moved equipment to higher ground. They remembered stories of past storms, including the one in 2005 that flooded half the parish. When the hurricane made landfall, it struck west of them, sparing Terrebonne the worst, but bringing enough rain and wind to flood fields and topple trees. Water lapped at the steps of Ruby's Place but did not enter. Afterward, neighbors helped each other clear debris. Celeste and Marcus walked the property, assessing damage. Several trees had fallen, including one of the older magnolias. Celeste stood over the uprooted tree, tears welling up. Marcus touched her shoulder. "We can plant a new one," he said gently. "We'll plant two." They did, placing a sapling on either side of the fallen trunk. They invited the community to a planting ceremony. Gabrielle read a passage from their upcoming book about the cyclical nature of storms and growth. The children took turns patting soil around the roots. It was a moment of shared grief and hope. After the storm, August returned. He drove up in an old pickup, dust covering the bumper. Celeste met him at the gate. He removed his hat, weathered hands gripping the brim tightly. "Heard the storm hit," he mumbled. "Wanted to see if y'all were okay." "We're fine," Celeste replied, surprised at the lump in her throat. She realized she had not truly seen August since the court. His hair was thinner, his face gaunt. His eyes held a sadness she hadn't noticed before. "Would you like to see the place?" He nodded. They walked slowly, Celeste pointing out new projects, the studio, the history wall, the garden expansion. August listened, occasionally asking a question. When they reached the magnolia saplings, he stopped. "Mama used to say magnolias are stubborn," he recalled. "They'll grow anywhere if you give them a chance." He looked at Celeste. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "I let bitterness guide me. Linny deserved better from us. You deserve better. I can't change what I did, but maybe I can help now. You need anything repaired?" Celeste smiled. "Always," she said, handing him a list of small tasks. It was a beginning. Later that week, he returned with tools and set to work fixing a broken fence. Neighbors watched, whispered, and then approached to offer help. The act of working side by side began to dissolve years of resentment. As winter approached, Ruby's Place prepared for its first anniversary celebration. They invited everyone, those who had supported them and those who had not. They decorated the studio with paper lanterns, the history wall with new additions, the garden with candles. They served gumbo, jambalaya, and sweet potato pie. Tanisha taught a dance. Lorraine read from the forthcoming book. August stood awkwardly at the back until Celeste pulled him forward. "You helped build this, too," she said. He flushed but stayed. In her speech, Celeste acknowledged the journey. 1 year ago, I came here with nothing but a key and a letter. I was filled with grief and fear. Today, I stand in a place filled with love, stories, and community. This farm was a gift from Lynnell, but it has become a gift from all of you. We have faced storms, literal and figurative, and we have stood. We have discovered gas beneath the soil and stories above it. We have argued and reconciled, and we are still here. Let this be a reminder that our roots are deep and our branches wide. The crowd cheered. August wiped his eyes discreetly. Jared hugged Gabrielle. Marcus toasted with sweet tea. The celebration lasted late into the night, voices mixing with the sounds of crickets and distant rigs. The following spring, Women of Terrebonne, Stories of Soil and Salt was published. The book launch was held at Ruby's place. Local news and regional magazines covered the event. Lorraine spoke about the importance of reclaiming narratives. Gabrielle talked about the process of digitizing archival materials, and Celeste dedicated the book to Ruby and Lynnell. The dedication read, "To Ruby, who fought with courage, and to Lynnell, who loved with foresight. May their stories guide us." The book became a regional bestseller, used in schools and community programs. It sparked conversations about land, gender, and history. Young people read about women who looked like their grandmothers and felt pride. Older women saw themselves validated. Funds from the book sales went towards scholarships for girls pursuing studies in history, environmental science, and the arts. Celeste smiled whenever she saw a young woman at Ruby's place flipping through the pages, pointing to a photograph and saying, "That's my great aunt." At the same time, the natural gas project reached its extraction peak. The revenue allowed the community to build a small clinic on the farm's edge, providing healthcare services that had been long neglected. They hired a nurse practitioner and a midwife. The clinic also offered mental health counseling. Taking care of the mind is like taking care of soil, Celeste told visitors. Neglect either and nothing grows. The presence of the clinic attracted more people to the farm, including men who had once dismissed it as women's stuff. They came for checkups and stayed for stories. Despite successes, challenges persisted. The price of natural gas fluctuated, affecting income. Government regulations changed, threatening funding for community programs. A new hurricane season brought anxiety. One rig leaked, causing minor contamination that the company addressed promptly, but it reminded everyone of the risks. The brothers still had disagreements, particularly regarding money distribution. August occasionally reverted to old patterns, pushing for more drilling. Celeste found herself mediating disputes, using skills she had honed at the library where she once negotiated between scholars. Balance, she reminded herself, is dynamic. One quiet evening, Celeste sat with Lynnell's final video. She had delayed watching it, wanting to prolong the sense that there was always one more message. Now she felt ready. She pressed play. Lynnell appeared older, his skin pale. "If you're watching this," he said, voice softer than before, "then you've probably been through a lot. I hope you found the hidden room. I hope you stood up to my brothers. I hope you looked at the sky here and felt at home. I wanted to tell you one more thing. I built this for you. But it wasn't just about bricks and boards. It was about giving you a place to be your fullest self. You've spent your life helping others find their stories. Let this place help you find yours. Don't be afraid to change it. Turn it into a school, a gallery, a garden. Invite people. Make noise. I didn't always know how to support you. I thought I did. But I see now that loving someone is not about protecting them from storms, but about giving them shelter and trusting they know how to weather it. I love you. I'll see you in the magnolias." Celeste sobbed quietly. She felt gratitude and sorrow, the bitter sweetness of endings and beginnings. She walked outside and sat among the magnolias. The wind rustled the leaves. She imagined Lynnell's hand on her shoulder. "I'm okay," she whispered. "We're okay." She thought about how love had been transformed from a private bond into a communal force. She imagined Ruby smiling, her sons working alongside Celeste, their differences still present but not insurmountable. She imagined Gabrielle holding her own child one day under these trees, telling stories that included all of them. The next day, Celeste began working on her own project, a collection of essays and poems capturing her journey from Baton Rouge widow to Terrebonne matriarch. She titled it Between River and Bayou. She wrote about the first time she saw the farmhouse, about pulling weeds while the brothers argued outside, about the sound of women's laughter in the studio. She wrote about natural gas, about the way it forced them to confront values, about the compromise that allowed the community to thrive. She wrote about the sensation of being rooted and free at once. The process was cathartic. When she read drafts aloud at Ruby's place, the women snapped their fingers in appreciation, a tradition from poetry slams in Baton Rouge. Celeste smiled. As the second anniversary of Lynnell's death approached, Celeste organized a memorial service under the magnolias. She invited everyone who had been part of the journey: family, neighbors, oil company representatives, drummers, quilters. They lit candles and placed them around the base of the trees. Marcus read a psalm. Lorraine read a passage from a free woman of color's diary. Gabrielle sang a hymn. Celeste recited a poem she had written: "We plant and we dig, we harvest and we fight. We lose and we find, we bend and we rise. We are river and bayou, we are root and bloom, we are story and silence. We are home." When the candles burned low, fireflies took their place, tiny lights flickering like whispers. People hugged, tears and smiles mixing. August gripped Celeste's hand and said, "Thank you for not giving up on us." Celeste replied, "Thank you for not walking away." That night, as she lay in bed, the window opened to let in the scent of magnolias and damp earth, Celeste felt a sense of completeness. The journey had not been smooth. There had been betrayal, doubt, and loss, but there had also been healing, truth, and community. The farm was no longer just a secret gift from a husband. It was a living testament to resilience. Years passed. The natural gas wells eventually slowed, their output declining as the deposit was exhausted. The rigs were dismantled, leaving behind pads that were reclaimed by grasses and wildflowers. Celeste watched the transformation with mixed feelings. The revenue had been essential, funding the cultural center and scholarships, but she was relieved to see the horizon free of industrial structures. The silence that returned was filled with voices at Ruby's place and the calls of birds reclaiming flight paths. Ruby's place had grown into an institution. The original studio expanded into multiple buildings, one for visual arts, one for culinary arts, one for storytelling and performance. A small museum housed artifacts from the parish's history, including tools, photographs, and oral recordings. The history wall had grown into a hall with panels dedicated to each family that contributed stories. Children visited on school trips, wide-eyed as they listened to elders recount life before cell phones and microwaves. University students came to conduct research. Artists in residence created works inspired by the landscape. The center won awards and grants. People from New Orleans and Baton Rouge made weekend trips to attend workshops, bridging urban and rural communities. Celeste remained at the heart of it. Her hair turned silver, her pace slowed, but her eyes remained sharp. She mentored younger women, encouraging them to take leadership roles. Gabrielle became director of programming, using her archival skills to curate exhibitions and her gentle firmness to mediate conflicts. Lorraine served as historical advisor. Tanisha managed the kitchen, turning it into a culinary incubator where women launched catering businesses. Marcus oversaw maintenance, training apprentices. Jared handled the gardens, now spread over acres. August visited occasionally, especially during harvest festivals, telling tall tales and teaching children how to bait a fishing hook. Celeste continued to write, publishing Between River and Bayou to critical acclaim. Readers praised its lyrical prose and deep compassion. Universities adopted it for courses on Southern literature and social history. Celeste was invited to speak at conferences, but she rarely traveled far. She preferred to host visitors under the magnolias, letting the scent of the blossoms do part of the talking. One day, a group of young journalists interviewed her. One asked, "What advice would you give to someone inheriting a complicated legacy?" Celeste thought for a moment, then said, "Listen before you judge. Dig into the soil, both literally and metaphorically. Find the stories beneath, and remember that love is not always neat. Sometimes it's messy and secretive and flawed, but it can still be a starting point for something beautiful." She often reflected on how different her life had become from what she once envisioned. The woman who had cataloged books in Baton Rouge now curated human stories. The widow who had once felt lost now guided others through their own labyrinths of heritage and trauma. The farm had become a microcosm of Louisiana, rich in culture, scarred by exploitation, resilient through community. She no longer felt the FOMO, fear of missing out, that had gnawed at her in Baton Rouge, the sense that life was passing her by. She had created, with others, a life filled with meaning and connection. As Celeste aged into her 70s, she began to think more intentionally about succession. She did not want Ruby's place to falter when she was gone. She convened a meeting with the board, which included Gabrielle, Marcus, Lorraine, Tanisha, and community elders. They discussed governance structures, financial sustainability, and programming. They agreed to establish an endowment funded by the remaining gas revenue, book royalties, and donations. They created a rotating leadership model to prevent burnout. They documented policies and procedures, ensuring institutional knowledge was recorded. Celeste also worked with Gabrielle to digitize the archive in case of natural disasters. They scanned photographs, transcribed oral histories, and backed up files to cloud servers. They partnered with the state university to create internships for students to assist, fostering the next generation of scholars and storytellers. Meanwhile, Ruby's Place expanded its reach. They collaborated with local high schools to incorporate oral history projects into curricula. They hosted exchange programs with communities in other parts of the world dealing with similar issues: land rights in Nigeria, cultural preservation in the Amazon. Through these exchanges, participants realized that their struggles were both unique and universal, that the fight to honor heritage and manage resources was global. At home, the community matured. Children who had once played tag under the magnolias grew into young adults who returned after college to work at Ruby's Place or start businesses nearby. Some left and never came back, but they carried with them the stories and recipes learned in the studio. The brothers aged as well. August's health declined, and he moved in with Marcus. On his last visit to Ruby's place, he sat quietly, watching children paint. He motioned Celeste over. "You did good," he whispered. "Thank you for holding on." He squeezed her hand and smiled faintly. He died a few weeks later, and his funeral was held in the studio he had once tried to claim. People shared stories of his wild youth and his mellowing age. Celeste spoke about forgiveness. Jared became a gentle presence. His hair turned white, his steps slowed, but he still weeded the garden every morning. One day, he brought Celeste a piece of paper, a poem he had written. It was simple but heartfelt, about dirt under fingernails and redemption. He said he had been too ashamed to share his words before. Celeste hugged him and posted the poem on the history wall. Marcus remained engaged in community affairs. He campaigned for local office, advocating for infrastructure improvements, and funding for cultural projects. He often cited the success of Ruby's Place as evidence that investing in people yields returns beyond monetary measures. He won a seat on the parish council. Watching him, Celeste thought about how far they had all come from the night he had threatened her on the porch. As for Gabrielle, she blossomed as a leader. She brought fresh ideas. Digital storytelling workshops, collaborations with tech companies to create augmented reality experiences of the history wall. She also maintained the emotional core of the place, ensuring that decisions were rooted in respect and care. She married a local teacher, and together they adopted a son. Celeste's heart swelled watching her daughter parent with patience and playfulness. She thought about how the farm would belong to this child one day, how he would grow up hearing stories under the same trees. Celeste updated her will, leaving the farm and Ruby's Place in trust for the community, with Gabrielle as primary steward. She wrote personal letters to each of the brothers, to Lorraine, to Tanisha, expressing gratitude and love. She wrote to the young women she mentored, encouraging them to take risks. She even wrote a letter to Lynnell, thanking him again and telling him about the magnolia's latest bloom. She sealed the letters and placed them in the hidden room, now not so hidden, as a time capsule. On a warm spring morning, Celeste woke early. She walked barefoot through the dew to the magnolia grove. She touched each tree, whispering names. Ruby, Lynnell, August, Jared, Marcus, Lorraine, Gabrielle. She looked at the new saplings, now sturdy, their branches stretching outward. She watched the sun rise over the bayou, light reflecting on the water's surface like a path. She felt the presence of those who had come before and those who would come after. That afternoon, she hosted a small gathering of close family and friends. They ate crawfish etouffee and drank sweet tea. Gabrielle sang a lullaby she remembered from childhood. Marcus told a joke that made everyone groan. Jared read another poem. Lorraine recited a passage from a newly discovered diary. Celeste laughed, her cheeks aching. She felt tired but content. Later, she retreated to her room, writing her last entry in her journal. She wrote about cycles, about how water rises and recedes, about how stories are lost and found, about how love can be a seed that grows into a forest. She wrote about the importance of leaving spaces for others to fill, of trusting that the work will continue without her. She wrote, "I am ready to rest, knowing that roots are deep and branches are wide." In the evening, as the sun set, Celeste lay down on her bed. The window was open and the scent of magnolias drifted in. She listened to the sounds outside, the laughter of children, the hum of voices, the distant croak of frogs. She thought about Lynnell's last video, about his wish for her to find her own story. She realized she had. She closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the bayou lull her. Her breathing slowed, then stilled. The next morning, Gabrielle found her mother at peace, a slight smile on her lips. Grief washed over her, but alongside it came gratitude. She knew what to do. They held a memorial under the magnolias. The community came, bringing flowers and food. They told stories of Celeste's generosity, her stubbornness, her laugh. They sang and danced. They promised to honor her legacy by continuing the work. As the service concluded, Gabrielle placed a plaque at the base of the oldest magnolia. It read, "In memory of Celeste Brooks, who turned grief into growth, secrets into stories, and a farm into a home for all. May her roots sustain us and her branches shelter us." The plaque was simple, but it carried weight. Life continued. Seasons turned. Ruby's place thrived. Children climbed magnolia trees. Oil prices rose and fell. Hurricanes came and went. Stories were told and retold, embellished and corrected. People moved away and returned. New names were added to the history wall. The farm remained, a living monument to resilience, love, and community. Years later, a young girl wandered into the hidden room, now a mini museum. She marveled at the files labeled August, Jared, and Marcus, at the old letters and photographs. She asked her grandmother, "Who were they?" The grandmother smiled and said, "They were people who made mistakes and made amends. Their stories are part of ours. Let me tell you." And she began. In that moment, the legacy of Celeste and Lynnell, of Ruby and her sons, of all the women who had stitched and sung and stood firm, continued. It flowed like the bayou, slow and enduring, carrying with it lessons, love, and the unending hope that through story and soil we can heal.